Are you considering applying to graduate school and are wondering if a master's or a PhD is the right choice for you? Well, you've come to the right spot because I have both and I have some insights to share. Today, I'm going to cover 3 questions that will help you decide which is the right fit. And make sure you stay till the end because I have a bonus insider tip to share that you may not know about that may help you if you end up feeling like you made the wrong choice. Hi, if you're new here, welcome to my channel. My name is Alicia and I have a master's and a PhD in the life sciences. On this channel, I want to help you figure out your ideal career path, succeed in accomplishing your goals, and ultimately lead a happy, fulfilling, and purposeful life. Today, we're talking about masters versus PhDs and which one you should apply for. The very first question that you need to ask yourself is, do you like research? Do you know if you like research? Have you done any independent research? If you don't know the answer to that question or you haven't had a lot of exposure to doing research, then I would recommend looking at master's programs first. And you can always do a PhD after you complete a master's. But a PhD is a pretty significant commitment. It usually takes anywhere from 4 to 7 years if you're in the United States to complete a PhD in the sciences. So that is a pretty significant chunk of time, and it's going to involve you doing a lot of independent research without a lot of guidance as to what your project will be. You'll have to come up with your own individual research ideas. Usually that means that you're going to be conducting at least 3 research projects, if not more, over the course of those 4 to 7 years. If you don't know that you love research, that's a lot of time to spend in your mid to late 20s, early 30s. And so do you want to commit that much time to something that you don't know you really truly love? So a master's is around 2 years. Again, it varies by country, but in the United States, I think a master's is usually 2 to 3 years in the sciences. So that's much shorter time commitment, and it can give you a good taste of what research is like. And then you can decide if you want to go and pursue a PhD after you complete a master's. Or you may decide, research is not the end all be all for you and you want to try something new, and then you haven't committed a huge chunk of time to getting a degree that is not really something that aligns with what you want to do. So that's question number 1. Do you like research? Do you even know? Question number 2, what are your career goals? Do you need a PhD or a master's to accomplish the goals that you want to accomplish? Does the career that you have in mind require either of those degrees? And this is kind of along the same lines as the last question. If your career doesn't really require a PhD, do you really want to commit a huge chunk of time to getting a degree that you won't necessarily need? And there are some potential downsides to having a PhD when you want a career that doesn't require it. So I would really assess whether or not your career path would benefit from you acquiring a PhD or if a master's would be sufficient. And if you don't know the answer to that question, what I would recommend you do is look up people that have the types of jobs that you might want to have, see what their career paths have been like, and their education paths have been like. Did they get those graduate degrees that you're considering getting? Another really great strategy is to actually set up informational interviews. And if you're curious about informational interviews, how to set them up, how to conduct informational interviews, make sure you like and subscribe because I'm going to have more videos on how to go about doing informational interviews. But that's essentially scheduling a time to meet with someone who, you're inspired by and you want to learn about their career and how they got to where they are. And so setting these up can be really, really helpful and can give you a lot of insight as to what kind of steps you should take in your own career path to accomplish your career goals. Yeah, question number 2 is, do you really need a PhD or master's? How is it going to benefit your career trajectory? And is it going to help you accomplish your goals? If it's not, again, a master's is probably a better bet because you're still going to get a lot of those useful skills that you would get out of a PhD without the huge time commitment that it would require. And then question number 3 is, after you've figured out, I really like research, I really think that I need a PhD to set myself up for success in my career path. Maybe you really want to go into academia and a PhD is on the horizon for you, or you feel like it is. Question number 3 I would ask is, are you a competitive applicant for a PhD program, particularly in your field for the, school that you would ideally want to go to, or schools? Are you a competitive applicant? And if you're not, a master's degree can be a useful stepping stone to enhance your application package. That was my situation. I went and got a master's first before I went and pursued my PhD because I didn't feel like my application was as strong as I wanted it to be to get into the types of programs that I really wanted to be admitted to. I didn't have the most stellar GPA when I finished college. I kind of discovered my major and field a little bit later in college, so I didn't have as much research experience as would be ideal. And so for kind of those two main reasons, I felt like there were some PhD programs that potentially I could get into, but not the ones that I really, really wanted to go into, not to work with the people that I was most excited to work for. So I did end up pursuing my master's first. That gave me more independent research experience, and I did really well in my classes during my master's program and had a 4.0 GPA from my graduate work, and my master's advisors were able to write me really stellar letters of recommendations. I also retook my GREs and really boosted my GRE scores as well. All of those things combined made me a much more competitive applicant to PhD programs the second time around when I was applying to graduate school. So if you feel like you check all those boxes and you have a really competitive application, then go for it. Go for it. Apply for the PhD first off and see what happens. And you can also apply for PhD programs and then kind of back up master's programs at the same time. But I do think it's worth taking some time and considering whether or not it'd be more beneficial for you to do a master's first so that you can get into the PhD program that you really want to. So those are my 3 questions that I think are a good place to start when you're debating between a master's and a PhD. But I did say I had one bonus tip. That's if you end up deciding, on one or the other, and then you get into it and you realize that maybe it wasn't quite the right decision for you. Let's say you start a master's program and you're like, man, I really love this, and I definitely think that I want to do a PhD. Or conversely, if you start a PhD program and you're, 6 months in, a year in, and you're like, oh my gosh, I hate this. What am I doing with my life? I can't imagine doing this for another 4, 5, 6 years. I don't want to do this anymore. What are your options? So, something that I think is important to think about ahead of time before you apply, if you think you could potentially be in a situation like that, is to keep in mind that for institutions that award both masters and PhDs, what I saw happen while I was getting my PhD is that there were quite a number of master's students that were admitted as master's students with the intention of only getting a master's. They were able to end up kind of being admitted into the PhD program and folding their master's into their PhD and just kind of extending their master's into a PhD. So that's one thing to consider, is that if you are kind of right now leaning towards the master's but are not totally excluding the concept of a PhD, you might want to look at institutions that award both types of degrees and have that kind of option for you. And then similarly, there is an option potentially where if you are admitted as a PhD student, you can end up getting a master's degree after you pass your qualifying exam. And so your qualifying exam is something you take about 2 to 3 years into your PhD, maybe your first year if you're really on top of it. But this is kind of an exam you take about your research and about your field, and I'll have more videos on what qualifying exams entail. But basically, after you pass your qualifying exam, you can what they call master's out and essentially stop graduate school at that point with your master's degree. So that is an option, and I don't think that necessarily everyone knows that that's an option when they go into graduate school, and so it's just kind of helpful to know. But of course, double check with the institutions that you're applying to see if that is indeed an option, because every school is different, every program is different, and their requirements are different. And then of course there are many schools that only award master's degrees, so that was the case where I got my master's degree, where there was no PhD option to kind of move on into. And so obviously, if that's the situation for you, you would have to apply to another school to ultimately get your PhD. But as I already mentioned, that can actually be to your benefit to make you a stronger candidate for PhD programs. And, if at this point you're still like, okay, well, I have a good sense, I definitely want to go to graduate school, and you're wondering exactly how to make your application as competitive as possible, there is one thing that I think is by far the most important thing that you need to have to give you the best chance of getting admitted to a top graduate program. So stay tuned for my next video where we're going to talk about that number one thing you should have on your application.